Well, hello, good folk. There is a word being bandied around lately called Brexit. I detest that word. I'd rather see something like the UK exiting Europe. But everybody's adopted Brexit, so there you have it. The deal about this is we started so badly. I cannot believe the stupidity of those who were entrusted with the business of negotiating us out of Europe. We went there on the first day, and Europe came up with the opening gambit, and any chess player knows that you do not fall for the opening gambit. Their opening gambit was, we have to resolve the problems over freedom of movement. We have to resolve the problems over the Irish border, and you have to agree how much you're going to pay us to come out of Europe. Well, we then said, yeah, okay, we'll deal with all of that. So they accepted the opening gambit. Had I been the chief negotiator on the day, I would have done my homework. I would have then brought my briefcase up from the floor onto the desk, opened it and pushed a document towards Mr. Barnier and say, Mr. Barnier, you need to read the document, you need to understand it, and then you need all the primary signatories for the EU to sign to say that they have read it, they understand it, and they accept our position. Now, just for your benefit, let me explain our position. On freedom of movement, we cannot negotiate because the people of the UK voted through the referendum that there would be no more freedom of movement. It would become something under the UK government's control about immigration. And therefore, if you have anything to talk about on freedom of movement, all proposals must come from Brussels. We cannot discuss freedom of movement. Secondly, the business of Brussels telling us what our laws are going to be, either by a directive or by a regulation, can no longer happen. A regulation is where Brussels puts it out and every member of Europe has to accept it. A directive is against those countries who are not conforming, and that is under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice to impose it upon those countries. Right? However, we would be saying, because of how the people of the UK voted, that can no longer be in place. Thirdly, the European Court of Justice can have no jurisdiction whatsoever over the judicial situation in the UK. And finally, we cannot be in the customs union because the customs union is what makes Europe a closed market and stops us negotiating with other countries over trade deals, and we have to be free to do that. So the proposal is this: if Brussels wants to bring in a new regulation or directive, we in the UK would be happy to hear your proposals so that we may discuss them in our Parliament, in our House of Commons, and our MPs will decide whether it's good or bad. There will be recommendations given by the government because regulations or directives that are to do with trade could be acceptable to us, but where it comes down to European politics, it will not be acceptable to us because the people of the UK voted against it. The same with the European Court of Justice. We will be happy to listen to what they have to say, but then it would not be down to Europe or the ECJ, it would be down to our Parliament and our MPs to decide. And when it comes to the customs union, we are very much in a position where we would like to talk to you about how we may facilitate trade. And that may mean there would be no border problem in Ireland, but it would not mean that we were not free to negotiate our own trade deals. So that's pretty much what's in that document, and it's pretty much what you must sign to accept. And when you do that, we can talk. Now, given you sign to accept that, you accept that European politics will no longer apply to the UK. So the only negotiation left is the one about trade. Currently, we have to pay you 90 million a year more than you pay us, because it's the way trade works. We buy more from you than you buy from us. You would do well to consider that when you go back and think about things. The only business on the table between you and us now, should you accept that document, is trade, and therefore we can't discuss anything other than that. And we cannot possibly come up with a figure of the value to the UK of leaving Europe until there is a trade agreement in place. When that happens, we can evaluate what it means to us. Now, in the meantime, you've been trying to bully us, and you've been trying to protect your place, if you like, because by bullying us, you show everybody else in Europe that it's not a good idea to get out. This has got to stop. We will not be pushed around. The deal is this: you keep talking about the cake, and we can't have our cake and eat it. Well, let me tell you, Mr. Barnier, the cake is now on your side of the table. We've given it to you, and you can sit and look at it, and after enough time you'll realise the cake's going stale. That is the point at which we have got notional agreements with other countries around the world about what our trading position is going to be. That is the point where you realise that all of the things that you buy from us that line your supermarket shelves will leave you tomorrow with empty shelves, unless you get off your political high horse and you put the people in place who understand business, and you talk to us about the trade we're going to do. Now, there are niche markets like the reciprocal trade between the UK and Germany over cars and car parts. It's worth £35 billion a year. Pounds, not euros. And I do believe that the car trade in Germany will be so strong a lobby against Mrs. Merkel, who is now a bit shakier than she used to be, that there will be a little special sideline deal to protect that business. And wherever the circumstances exist for business between Europe and its partners and the UK, I think you'll come up with the answer, because you won't have any other choice. And when you begin to do this, you'll realise that the only way through it is to come up with the same kind of reciprocal deal for everything else. But your great problem is you're a closed market of 508 million people. Closed being that your customs union means we can't trade with anybody else. But we have a Commonwealth, and they have been beating a door to London to come and trade with us. So I think pretty much as you wanted to impose European politics on us, that ain't gonna work. You have to be realistic and think about trade, and if you don't think about trade, we've nothing to talk about. We'll be okay. Alright, now, just as a final shot, a general election in the UK is not fair. It's first past the post, two-party system, whereas a referendum is almost like proportional representation. Every vote counts, and the majority of people in the UK wanted out of Europe. So the problem that we have is that all the points that we've just mentioned to you that are in that document that you need to sign for are things where our hands are tied as negotiators. They are tied by the vote of the people of the UK. Now, just to remind you, on our statute books in the UK there is one law left that attracts the death penalty, and it's a law called treason. Roughly defined, for your benefit, treason is to act against Her Majesty, or Her Majesty's government, or Her Majesty's subjects. And that is the reason why we are limited on what we can talk about, and all proposals must be thought through and brought forward from Brussels. Because I know that myself and none of my negotiating team are prepared to dangle by the neck until dead on a Friday morning at Traitors' Gate just to put a smile on a European face. So now you've got that, you may go away and think about it and let us know when we can meet again. Now you see, people, if we'd have done that, we would have taken control, total control over the negotiations. There would have been, at any time when Europe wanted to inject politics, we could have said, well, sorry, you've signed to accept the agreement, you know we can't talk about that, now let's get back to trade. And we would have gone straight away down the road of the only thing that we bother about, and that's trade. But we'll get to that later, because trade with Europe is not as important as people are making it out to be. Alright? Now, having got to that point, we have got to start looking back at ourselves. And there are two sides to the fence. There's the exiters and there's the remainers. And after the vote, we might call them the remoaners. I understand at my age that so many people in the country were born into a country that was a part of Europe, and they have no concept whatsoever of what it would be like to be out of Europe. There might be the guy who's built a business because his brother went and lived in Germany because of the freedom of movement, and the guy in Germany said, hey look, I can buy this, this and this at this kind of price over here, so if I buy it and ship it to you, you can flog it, there's a good profit, we've got a business. Fine, they've done it, no problem. But the deal is this: the only thing they've ever known is Europe. Right? You get born into a life. If the life you were born into was full of mobile phones and computers, you don't know what it was like before we even had them. People of my age do. We have seen the development of life, mankind, and so on. So, when we get these people who are so scared of being out of Europe, there are things they just do not see, because these are things that went before they were ever born. talk about this small island, let me take you through a little bit of history. The politicians, and there is where your Ramonas are, ought to know history. Before you become a politician, you should study history so that you don't make the same mistakes that were made before you ever got there. But they never do they? They always think they're right. Very often they're not right. Very often, pretty much all the time, but then they go and pat themselves on the back when they retire and say, oh, I've changed the world. Yeah. When did you last see a politician change the world? If you want your potted history, this tiny island of 1.5 million people, we sent explorers out and we discovered what in those days was called the New World. But when we did that, we found all goods and things that had never been seen in England. And so our explorers opened up the gates to these new worlds, because we knew that we could actually take things from this country that they needed. And a lot of that was education of how to use the things we took them. But we did that because we wanted from them what they got that we hadn't got. So on the strength of that, this tiny island of 1.5–2 million people built something called the British Empire. The British Empire spanned 2/3 of the civilized Western world. And to facilitate the trading, we built the largest merchant fleet of ships the world had ever seen, until the advent of the supertankers in the late 50s, early 60s. We did that. Now we've got 27 partners across in Europe, people we call friends. And not that long ago they were laid on the floor with their hands over their ears, hoping that the jackboots stomping all over their country were going to miss the Reds. Never happened in England. Through the brilliance of our design and engineering, we had the airplanes in the sky to knock out 5 Luftwaffe planes to every one that we lost. And Germany never set a jackboot on English soil. Okay, at the end of the war, we had the luxury of the Americans coming in to help us and giving us lease land, whereby they provided us with the arms and munitions and said, oh, pay us back later. But the Americans had to do that because the amount of money tied up in England through reciprocal trade was such that they knew how much it would cost them if Germany took England. So the Americans, through Pearl Harbor, which is another story, became involved in a war where their president won the election on the basis that they wouldn't be involved in the war. So Pearl Harbor changed that. Then they came in with us. We had the 1,000 bomber raids, the whole thing. I mean, Hitler would have walked all over us without America and without him making a mistake. He had made 0 mistakes. He decided, because of the strength of resistance of this tiny island and its people, that he would go for Russia. So he went for Russia. What he didn't bank on was the Russian winter, which the Russian military could stand, and he couldn't. And it was his attack on Russia that cost him the war, ultimately. And we'll come back to that. It's important within the development of Europe. So now, unless we're being told lies, we're told there's 1.5 million Muslims in Britain. Maybe it's more like 7 or 8. And maybe those who are very concerned are worried about the dilution of the British backbone. But I'm not. I've lived in this country so many years you wouldn't believe. I'm not an Englishman, but I come from English background, English blood. I've lived here a long time. And the British people are up to it. And all I can say to those Ramonas, people who've got businesses that are absolutely enshrined in Europe, is get up off your backsides and look. Outside of Europe there are 53 Commonwealth countries, all of them wanting to do business with us. That's one country short of twice as many as those who are in Europe. But they're worldwide. Europe's a market of 508 million people. Outside of Europe there's nearly 7 billion that want to trade with us. It's mathematical, it's logical. When there's 14 times as many people out there as there is in Europe, why can't we find markets out there for our goods? Why can't we find suppliers out there? And then there's the big markets like India and China, America, Canada. There are so many restrictions on us doing business with them at the moment because we're in Europe. When we're not in Europe, we can do what the hell we want. I would tell you that I expect to see the increase in the gross domestic product of the UK to be around about 4% and possibly up to 6% when we are not trading with Europe and we are trading with the rest of the world. It's up to us. But it's up to our business people, instead of sitting back and crying and moaning about not being in Europe anymore. Just get off your arse and be a Brit. Do what the British people do. Get out there and fight for it. Grab what's yours. There's so much to be grabbed out there that Europe doesn't offer you. That's the reality. Now the other problem we've got here is in recent times we've got a lot of Ramonas within the House of Lords, and some people think the House of Lords should be got rid of, others think they provide a valuable service. They have given out about 14 defeats to the government, which the government now has to bring back before the House of Commons and reverse those defeats before the negotiations to get out of Europe can proceed. I tell you what, I would say to those people in the House of Lords, because most of the amendments and objections that they put forward and voted for are such that they go totally against the vote in the referendum. Maybe if we got half a dozen lords swinging by their necks at Traitors' Gate on a Friday morning, we get rid of a few lords we don't need, but the rest of them will sit back and think about what they do, what they say and how they vote. I personally, if I come up against anybody who is quite obviously acting in a way that could be considered to be treason, I would push the authorities with every bit of effort I've got to take that person into a court of law. I'd love to see the judge put the black cap on. We know it won't happen. They don't knock people off these days. But some of these people who are so irresponsible in their thinking, maybe they need to be brought to heel a little bit. The United Kingdom will be substantially better off and will be in a position to pursue growth once we're out of the grasps of Europe. Now we need to go somewhere else here, and this is more important. The other day there was a woman on TV saying, and she was fighting to remain in Europe and saying, I'm doing this for my kids. Well, sad to see a brain trying to work when there's no brain cells left alive in it. Let me tell her and the rest of you what the future is for your children. What you've not done is you've not listened to what the main players in the European Union have been saying. Now the main player is Germany, but at the moment they've got domestic problems, and the next main player to step up is France. And one or two of their most senior European members have been quite vociferous. One thing that they've come up with is that they believe that the euro should be unified. In other words, those people, the 8, after we've left, that are not in the euro, are very likely to be required by regulation to dump their currency and join the euro. Now we know from a few short years back, when the euro was in serious trouble, in our country, in the UK, we were so delighted we were still on the pound. We went from strength to strength as they were falling down the pit. But that's just economics. We're now talking politics. And if they go for a unified euro, that's the first step towards the United States of Europe, where the countries lose their country status and become a state within Europe. Now the other thing that was mooted by the French is so dangerous. They were saying that Europe needed its own military presence to provide protection to all the member states. Well, when China's got as many people in the military as they've got, and as much in the way of nuclear arms as they've got, no other country in the world that offers its citizens protection can be actually doing anything other than a protection racket. Oh, we'll protect you, we'll give you an army, a navy and an air force, but we need to take 20% of all you earn to pay for it. Well, I mean, around the world, a protection racket's illegal unless it's called politics. So trying to say that even 27 states together could stand up to China is, let me say, a lot less than truthful. But the problem is, Mrs. Gurley, with no brains, who's doing it all for your kids. Let me tell you what happens to your kids. Once they have a military presence, your children will be conscripted to serve in the European forces for 2, 3 or maybe even 4 years. Is that what you want for your kids? You didn't see it, did you? You didn't even think about it. But it gets worse than that. After the Second World War, the Joint Chiefs of the 3 countries, what they did was they sat down with Germany and they imposed some very, very severe restrictions as to what they could and couldn't do militarily, because we'd had World War I caused by Germany and its Kaiser and lost, and we had World War II caused by Hitler and lost. So all these restrictions, military restrictions, were imposed on Germany. But if we have a European military force where Germany is still the prime leader as the country of Europe, it brings them a military power that they have not had since the Second World War. But it makes them a nuclear power by the virtue of France. How many people want that? Now let's start to get to the real basis of Europe. Papers have been recently released under freedom of information, and these were documents relating to meetings between Western world leaders, Western world senior company owners, and Western world economists. And the purpose of the meetings was after the Second World War, and they were trying to find the German money, the Nazi money. Now they already knew from documents that they held about meetings where the Nazis had said, we fought for Europe in World War I and we lost. We're fighting for Europe now and we're not going to win. The next time we'll take it by financial means, and that way we'll win. If you look at Europe now, where Germany is a substantial power, looks like it is. But what happened here is we can account for about $500 million of Nazi money, because we know that the American Special Forces located it and stole it and repatriated it. Whether it got back to America or got back to their own bank accounts, we don't know. But there is so much money never ever been found recovered. Now, some of the economists said, we think this money found its way back into Germany. Now, if you're going to grow an economy, you need a lot of money. You invest the money and the economy grows, therefore the money comes back. But the economy by then is so much better. Right? So it's a never-ending process. You put money in, you get more out. But you can't grow the economy unless you have the money to put in. Please tell me that there's an economy in Europe that is faster growing than Germany's. You can't. Germany has been the economy of Europe since the Second World War. So some of the suspicions about Nazi money finding its way back into German banks could be well founded, and it is coming from some of the major brains. So we can see here where the politics, through unification of the euro, through building a military force and so on, is moving more and more towards a federal Europe. Now that will alarm pretty much every other major country in the world. Russia, America, China, they will all want to keep the doors open with Europe, do business with Europe, but they will be very, very apprehensive about the political situation. But from the UK's point of view, we are a nuclear force. Our nuclear deterrent is dedicated to the United Nations, under the umbrella of America, that provides us with the nuclear weapons. We will be just 20 miles away from France, but the more it moves towards federal Europe, the more it moves away from our political thinking. And as that happens, the amount of trade we do with Europe will diminish. We will get to a place in 30 years from now, 40 years, where we are the enemy of Europe on its doorstep. Not a nice place to be when we're a nuclear power, and France, and therefore Europe, is a nuclear power. We, looking forward and thinking about politics and how politics is moving, ought to care a lot less about our trade. What we ought to do is be thinking about a straight get out, build your business abroad with our old friends, the people we always used to deal with until signing the European paperwork meant we couldn't do it anymore. These people are willing to forgive and come back and to get back on doing business with us. We ought to completely walk away from what we know and go in. Well, it might be what we don't know, but if we look at our history, it's what we do know, and it was always good to deal with them in the past. We ought to have a totally different perspective on this. I do think that our negotiations with Europe are likely to be quite fruitless in respect of what we would hope they would be, but in years to come, we will see that we went the right way. It would be impossible to convince the powers that be at the moment that that was the way to go, because the strength of the lobby of current business, and if you go to work next Monday and it means that your job's there because you sold stuff into Germany, you can't possibly think the way I'm thinking. But if you're getting on in your life and you go to work and you think, well, it's not about me, it's about my son, my daughter, then thinking the way I'm thinking might quite be what you're looking for, because you want to see further forward. People never do this. People walk around in life and they've got their big blinkers on. Nobody ever opens their eyes and lets themselves see what's there to be seen. You can look at it and not even know it's there unless your head lets you see it. And I'm looking to that future where we will be on the front line in the UK, pretty much against Europe. No business with them at all, no trading. All our business will be elsewhere. But it does mean that as the closest enemy, we'll have a lot of friends behind us. The business of Europe is not what it's being seen to be at the moment. I believe it's much more the way I see it. And I think we ought to begin to look at those possibilities. Begin to forget about the lobbies shouting over our shoulders like, do this, do that, do it, you know. We ought to think about the real future. But of course, that never happens, does it? Nice talking to you.